We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house. That was the first thing my daughter said when I answered her call that morning. No greeting, no hesitation. Just that one line, dropped into the quiet of my kitchen like a stone into still water. I could hear the faint hum of traffic from her end, the clipped rhythm of her heels against the floor, the tone of someone who had already made up her mind. I was sitting by the window, the morning light slanting across the table where Tom's old mug still sat. His favorite one, the one with a faded picture of Cape Cod on it. It had been 7 months since the day he collapsed in our kitchen while fixing the toaster. 7 months since I watched the strongest man I knew slip away before I could even call his name. Now the house that held 40 summers of our lives, our children's laughter, his salt-stained shirts, the smell of sunscreen and blueberry pie was gone. Sold. Claire didn't wait for me to respond. She spoke quickly like a business memo. We're flying to Ireland tonight. Derek's found a real estate project in Dublin. We needed the funds immediately. I've transferred you 25%. Should be enough for a few months. Take care, Mom. The line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone, my reflection faintly visible in the black screen. 45 years of motherhood reduced to a wire transfer and a polite goodbye. Yet I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. Because what Claire didn't know, what no one knew, was that her father had left me a sealed yellow envelope in his drawer. On it, in his careful handwriting, he wrote, "Open only when you're ready, Maggie. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community." When the call ended, the silence that followed was heavier than grief. It wasn't the kind of silence that asked to be broken. It was the kind that settles deep inside you, pressing against your ribs, until even breathing feels like betrayal. I stared at the phone lying face down on the table, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. Outside, a gray Boston morning crawled through the blinds. The kind of day Tom used to call the in-between. Not cold enough for snow, not warm enough for hope. Cape Cod. She'd sold it. Our house by the sea. The place Tom and I built with our bare hands during the first summer after our wedding. He poured the foundation himself. I painted the walls pale yellow because he said it looked like sunlight, even on cloudy days. That house wasn't just a property. It was the memory of everything we were before life became about bills, deadlines, and the slow fading of laughter between rooms. And the Jeep? God, the Jeep. That rust-red Wrangler had carried us through so many storms, literal and otherwise. Tom used to call it his faithful mule. He taught Claire to drive in it when she was 16. I can still hear her laughter echoing through the dunes, her blonde hair whipping in the wind, Tom's arm hanging out the window as he shouted over the surf, "Easy on the clutch, kiddo." Now both the house and the Jeep were gone, sold, traded for some glossy dream of Dublin real estate that would vanish the moment someone's greed got bored. My fingers found the edge of Tom's old mug again, tracing the chipped rim. The coffee inside had gone cold, but I kept holding it, as if warmth might somehow return if I waited long enough. It didn't. People always talk about heartbreak as if it comes with an explosion, as if it's loud, violent, full of screaming and shattering glass. But the truth is, heartbreak is often quiet. It arrives disguised as numbness. You don't even feel it happening, you just notice eventually that something in you has gone terribly still. And yet, through all of that stillness, I smiled. Not out of madness or denial, but because I had something Claire didn't know existed. A secret that Tom had left behind. A single yellow envelope tucked away in the back of his drawer, beneath his socks and old receipts. He had handed it to me a week before his stroke. We were sitting on the porch at dusk, the Cape wind rolling in, the sky turning that soft pink he loved so much. He said my name the way only he could, slow, with a trace of laughter in it. "Maggie," he'd said, "if anything ever happens to me, open this when you're ready. Not before." At the time I laughed, told him to stop talking like a man in a movie, but he only smiled and kissed the top of my head. And then life went on. Until it didn't. Now 7 months later after that phone call I realized I was ready. The bus ride back to Dorchester felt longer than usual. I sat by the window watching the red brick streets slide past like memories on repeat. Couples walking dogs. Teenagers with earbuds. A delivery man whistling off-key. All of them living ordinary lives, while mine had just tilted into something else entirely. When I stepped off the bus, the air was damp, carrying that mix of rain and gasoline that always reminded me of early spring. I climbed the front steps of our house, the one Tom had remodeled 3 times because he never believed a home was ever truly finished. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. The faint scent of cedar, the ticking of the old wall clock, the chair he always sat in with his crossword. It was strange how the world could lose someone but the house still remembered them perfectly. I went upstairs to our bedroom. The light filtering through the lace curtains painted soft patterns on the wooden floor. I knelt by his dresser, pulled open the bottom drawer, and there it was, the yellow envelope, edges slightly curled, my name written in his neat engineer's handwriting. I hesitated. Part of me was afraid to open it, as if doing so would make his absence more permanent. But the other part, the teacher, the wife, the mother, knew that whatever was inside, he meant for me to see it now. I slid my finger under the flap. Inside were neatly folded documents, each clipped and labeled with the precision that was so very Tom. As I began to read, my breath caught. The first sheet was a deed, the title to our Cape Cod home. My heart twisted. So, it was still under our name, not sold directly by Claire? But as I flipped through, I realized there were more. 7 property titles. 7. Each bearing our names. Not just the Cape House but a penthouse in Seaport District, a row of 12 rental rooms in Provincetown, 4 houses in Jamaica Plain, and, God help me, a full 18-story apartment building in Back Bay. The same building where Claire and Derek had been living. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling. Tom had never spoken of any of this. We lived modestly, always saying we had enough. He'd refused luxury cars, designer clothes, even new appliances. And yet here in my lap lay enough wealth to change generations. But that wasn't all. Beneath the stack of deeds were investment certificates. Shares in 3 construction companies I recognized by name. One of them had just won a state contract worth millions. And then the final page, a single statement from Sullivan Legacy LLC, a name I'd never heard before. My eyes widened as I read the balance line. $12,437,982.24. $12.4 million. I covered my mouth with my hand. The number blurred through my tears, but the realization hit me clean and hard. Tom had built all of this quietly, piece by piece, while I believed we were just another middle-class couple coasting toward retirement. He had lived simply not because he had to, but because he chose to. And now I understood why he'd kept it from Claire. She had always been bright, ambitious, but also dangerously drawn to status, the kind of woman who measured worth in square footage and brand names. Tom must have seen it too. Maybe he feared that giving her too much too soon would turn her love into entitlement. He wasn't punishing her. He was protecting her. Protecting what little humility she still had left. The room felt smaller suddenly, filled with the weight of his foresight. I could almost hear him, his voice calm and steady, saying what he used to when I'd get upset at Claire's arrogance. Don't worry, Maggie. Sooner or later, life teaches what we cannot. I ran my fingers over his handwriting again. The label on the outside of the envelope, open only when you're ready, wasn't about grief. It was about courage, about whether I was ready to act. And I was. For 7 months I had been drifting through loss, letting the world decide what was taken from me. But now, holding these papers, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. Tom hadn't just left me an inheritance. He had left me a mission. Claire thought she'd sold my world to build hers. But she had no idea that the world she was living in literally belonged to me. I folded the documents carefully back into the envelope, pressed it to my chest, and looked toward the window. The late afternoon light glowed faintly golden, breaking through the gray sky over Dorchester. And for the first time since Tom's funeral, I felt him near, not as a ghost but as a guide. "All right, Tom," I whispered softly. "Lesson time." Then I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and reached for the phone. There was a lawyer I needed to call. The rain had stopped by the time I stepped into Evelyn O'Connell's office. The glass walls shimmered with streaks of light reflecting off Boston Harbor, boats gliding silently below like white ghosts on dark water. The air smelled faintly of cedar and paper, a mix that always reminded me of Tom's study. Evelyn rose from behind her desk, sharp and graceful in her gray suit, her silver hair swept into a bun that meant business. We'd known each other for decades. She handled our first mortgage, our wills, even the minor dispute Tom once had with a contractor. But today I wasn't here for paperwork. She studied my face before speaking. "You got the call." I nodded. "She sold the beach house. And Tom's Jeep." For a second, Evelyn looked as if she didn't believe me. Then she leaned back, crossing her arms. "The Jeep too? That man loved that car more than his pension plan." I smiled faintly. "She said they needed the money for a project in Dublin." Evelyn clicked her tongue, half in pity, half in irritation. That girl always had ambition, but no patience. I opened my purse and placed the yellow envelope on the table. Its edges were soft now, worn from my fingers tracing them night after night since the day Claire called. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. "Tom's handwriting," she whispered. "Read it," I said. She unfolded the letter carefully, scanning line after line until her brow furrowed. When she finally looked up, the respect in her eyes was mixed with disbelief. "Well, Maggie," she said slowly, "either your husband was the cleverest man I ever met or the most stubborn." "Both," I replied. The documents inside revealed everything. A network of trusts, properties, shares, and companies, each layered beneath the name Sullivan Legacy LLC. Tom had created it years before his death. The Cape Cod house, the rental apartments, the stock portfolio, all technically belonged to the company, and I was its sole trustee. Evelyn exhaled, tapping her pen against her notepad. "So Claire sold something she never actually owned." "Exactly." We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the city beyond the windows filling the room. My fingers rested on Tom's neat signature at the bottom of the document. I could almost hear his voice, calm and certain. "Mags, if she ever chooses greed over gratitude, the lesson must come from you." Finally, I said, "I want to reverse the transaction." Quietly, "The buyer can be compensated, but the deed must return to the company. And Evelyn, no one tells Claire." Evelyn's pen froze midair. "You're going after your own daughter?" I met her gaze steady. "No, I'm going after her ignorance." Her lips curved into something between a smile and a warning. "You're playing big, Maggie." I looked out at the gray-blue harbor, the seagulls circling above the waves. "No," I said softly. "I'm teaching my final lesson." There was no anger in my voice, no bitterness. Just the kind of resolve that only comes after a lifetime of loving too much and being taken for granted. "Then we'll proceed," Evelyn said, pulling out a folder. "We'll send a certified letter under Sullivan Legacy LLC demanding return of property rights. Once she receives it, she'll realize what she's done." "Good," I said, standing. "Let her learn the value of something before she loses everything." As I walked out, the clouds began to part, and sunlight spilled across the glass floor of the corridor. For the first time since Tom's death, I felt the faint pulse of purpose again. 3 weeks later, Boston was biting cold, the kind that stung your lungs when you breathed. Claire stepped out of the terminal at Logan Airport with her suitcase dragging unevenly behind her, its handle wrapped in duct tape. Her hair, usually sleek and brushed to perfection, clung to her temples in limp strands. The heels she once wore to every business meeting were gone, replaced by worn sneakers. She looked around, waiting for someone to pick her up. No one came. Derek's number went straight to voicemail. Her banking app showed negative balances, the Dublin project had collapsed, and the investors had disappeared. The message that changed everything came while she was still standing outside Terminal B. It was from Sullivan Legacy LLC. She opened the email, frowning at the unfamiliar sender. Then she froze. "Notice of property ownership dispute. All assets connected to 42 Seaside Road, Cape Cod, are under legal review. Current deed invalid. Immediate restitution required." Her heart dropped. The Jeep, the house, everything she thought she'd sold. The wind picked up, whipping her hair into her face. Her phone buzzed again. Bank alerts, legal warnings, and an international transaction reversal notice. It was as if the universe had chosen this precise moment to unravel her world thread by thread. "Mom," she whispered under her breath, though she wasn't sure if it was a curse or a plea. She tried to call me, but my number rang once and went dead. She tried again. Then again. Nothing. By the time she made it to a taxi, her hands were trembling. She gave the driver my address in Dorchester, the red brick house with ivy crawling up the walls, the same house she'd begged me to sell years ago. The ride felt endless. Boston rolled by in gray streaks, the city she'd once fled to chase something bigger, brighter. Now she was coming home with a half-broken suitcase and no place left to go. When she arrived, she hesitated before the gate. The porch light was on. Through the window she saw me sitting by the fireplace, reading, calm as ever. She stood there for a long moment, shoulders hunched, face pale, before finally knocking. I opened the door slowly. "Claire." Her voice cracked. "Mom, what did you do?" I looked at her. At the daughter who once believed she was too smart for sentiment, too modern for morals. The wind carried the faint scent of salt from the harbor, and for a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to chase shells along the beach with her father's laughter echoing behind her. "Come in," I said simply. She stepped inside, eyes darting to the familiar furniture, the photos on the mantel, the worn rug that still bore the mark of her spilled lemonade from when she was 7. The house hadn't changed. Only she had. "I lost everything," she whispered. "Derek left. The deal was fake. The investors gone. And now this letter." I gestured toward the envelope on the table. "You sold something that didn't belong to you." She stared at me, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I met her gaze evenly. "Your father built more than a house, Claire. He built a test. And you failed it." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, though pride held them back. "This isn't punishment," I continued softly. "It's perspective." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint crackle of firewood and the steady rhythm of the clock above the mantel, each tick marking the distance between who she was and who she could have been. Outside, snow began to fall, silent and slow. Inside, for the first time in years, Claire didn't have a plan, a project, or a purpose. She just stood there, face pale, heart bare, realizing that the mother she thought powerless had quietly rewritten the rules of everything she believed she controlled. And I simply poured 2 cups of tea, because the lesson wasn't over yet. The snow was falling harder by the time Claire knocked again. The kind of snow that softened the streets but stung your skin if you stood still too long. Through the frosted window I saw her silhouette, thin, small, uncertain. For a second I almost didn't move. I wanted her to feel that pause, that silence between cause and consequence. Then I reached for the doorknob. When the door opened, the smell of butter and baked scones drifted into the cold air. I was wearing Tom's old robe, the one with the faded plaid cuffs and a missing button. It still smelled faintly of his aftershave, even after all these months. I saw the way Claire's eyes caught on it, the robe, the familiarity, the quiet ghost of her father lingering in the house she thought she'd erased. She shivered, lips trembling. "Mom, I didn't let her finish." My voice was calm, steady, almost too soft. "Come in, daughter. I just baked some scones." It wasn't anger she saw in my eyes, but something colder, something steadier. The kind of look that came after all the tears had already been shed. She stepped inside, dragging her suitcase across the floorboards, leaving a faint trail of melted snow behind. The warmth of the fire reached her face, but her hands stayed clenched. She glanced around the living room as if it were a museum of things she'd forgotten to value. Tom's fishing hat on the hook, the family photo from her graduation, the old piano by the window. I walked past her, carrying the plate of scones to the kitchen table. The same table where Tom and I had sat through every hard decision of our marriage. The mortgage, the hospital bills, the silence of grief after his passing. "Sit," I said. She obeyed, quietly, like a child again. We ate without words for several minutes. The fire crackled, and the clock ticked on the wall, filling the spaces where our conversation should have been. When I finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Your father loved that beach house. It was where he built everything that made you who you are." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Derek said. "Derek said." I echoed softly, but there was no accusation in my tone. Only fatigue. You always listen to people who promise shortcuts, Claire. You never stayed long enough to build anything on your own." The words landed heavy between us. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I poured her a cup of tea, placed it in front of her and said, "You'll sleep in your old room tonight." Her brows knit in confusion. "Mom, I can't stay here. I don't even." I cut in gently, my voice unshakable. "You'll stay. Rest. We'll talk in the morning." She hesitated, then nodded. When she disappeared up the staircase, I sat alone by the fire, watching the shadows shift across the photographs on the mantel. I could almost hear Tom's voice again, warm, teasing, wise. "Let her fall, Maggie. Then help her climb. That's how she'll learn." So I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the fire meet the ache in my chest. Love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's the quiet hand that lets you fall so you can learn how to stand. Outside, the snow fell through the dark like white forgiveness. Inside, a mother prepared for the hardest lesson of her life. Morning arrived gray and cold. The kettle whistled, sharp against the hush of the house. When Claire came down, her hair was tangled, her face drawn. She looked nothing like the woman who once strutted through airports in designer coats. She looked like someone finally seeing herself for the first time. "Sit," I said again, and she did. I slid a folded list across the table. "You'll sell the jewelry you still have. The ones Derek didn't take." Her lips parted in disbelief. "Mom, those are all you have left," I finished. "Exactly. Sell them. You'll use the money to pay off what you owe. You'll start again." Tears welled in her eyes. "I can't." "You can," I said. My tone was even, but my heart ached beneath it. "You wanted independence. Now you'll earn it." That afternoon I made some calls to an old friend who managed a hotel near the harbor. By evening, Claire had her first night shift. Housekeeping. $14 an hour. When I dropped her off, she didn't say a word. She just stared at the lobby lights, her breath fogging up the car window. I knew she wanted to scream, to beg me to stop, but she didn't. She just nodded once, got out, and walked toward the revolving doors. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, the city lights flickering across the snow, and thought about how strange it was, the things a mother has to do to save her child. At 2 a.m. I imagined her there, in that cold hotel corridor, pushing a mop bucket, her hands raw from cleaning detergent. The same hands that once held champagne flutes and signed contracts. Now they were scrubbing floors. In the distance, a clock chimed. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and made tea for two. Old habit. The house felt both full and empty. The kind of silence that hums with meaning. Through the thin wall upstairs, I could hear faint sounds when she came home near dawn. The door creaked. Footsteps shuffled. Then a muffled sob. It wasn't loud, just a trembling sound that caught in her throat and faded. I didn't move. I didn't comfort her. Not yet. Instead, I poured the tea into 2 cups, leaving one by her door. Because love, the real kind, isn't about rescuing someone from pain. It's standing quietly beside them while they learn to rescue themselves. And as I stood there, hand resting on the old wooden banister, I whispered to the empty hallway, "Let this hurt teach her what comfort never could." Downstairs, the fire cracked faintly, the sound of renewal hidden inside decay. Upstairs, behind the door of her 16-year-old room, Claire cried herself into the kind of sleep that only comes after pride finally breaks. Somewhere between her tears and the slow rhythm of the night, I knew the lesson had finally begun. The morning began like any other, gray, heavy, and still. I was in the kitchen folding Tom's old sweater when I heard Claire's car pull into the driveway. The sound of her footsteps was slower this time, her gait heavier, deliberate. When she entered the house, her face looked pale, her eyes rimmed red but clear, as if she'd been awake for hours thinking. She was holding something. A worn brown envelope, edges torn and softened by time. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "I found this in Derek's car. It was stuffed under the seat." She handed it to me, but I didn't reach for it. I simply nodded for her to open it. Inside was a smaller envelope, the color of aged paper, the kind Tom used for all his personal letters. His handwriting, still strong and steady, ran across the front. "For Claire. Only when she's ready." Claire's lips quivered as she unfolded the letter inside. I stood in silence, watching the tremor in her fingers as she read. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, it means life has finally brought you to your knees, not to punish you but to wake you up. I wish I could have told you this in person, but I knew you wouldn't listen then. You needed to lose what you thought mattered to remember what truly does. Inside this envelope is a key to a safe deposit box at Fidelity Bank, Copley Place. In it, you'll find something meant to help you stand again, not with money but with faith. Use it wisely and remember, the worth of a person is never measured in dollars, but in what they do when no one is watching. Love, Dad. By the time she finished reading, tears were streaming freely down her face. She pressed the key against her palm as though it were a relic. He left this for me, she whispered. Even after everything. That afternoon we went together to Fidelity Bank. The vault was quiet, sterile, the air-conditioned chill thick enough to feel on the skin. Claire handed the key to the clerk with shaky hands, and soon, a small silver box was brought out. She hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside was a neatly folded document, an insurance policy, yellowed slightly at the edges. She scanned the lines with wide eyes, her voice breaking when she reached the sum. $1 million in my name. But there was something else handwritten beneath the signature. Another note from Tom. This money isn't your second chance, Claire. It's the reminder that your father never stopped believing you could make one for yourself. Claire's sob echoed in that silent room. She covered her mouth, tears falling onto the document. And for the first time I didn't stop her. I let her cry because that wasn't the cry of loss, it was the cry of awakening. As we left the bank, I saw something new in her posture. Not arrogance, not pride, but humility. The kind that only comes when you've met yourself at your lowest and finally decided to rise. That night she didn't speak much. She just sat by the fireplace, the insurance letter beside her like a quiet monument to her father's faith. When she finally turned to me, her voice was soft, fragile but steady. Dad knew I'd ruin everything. I smiled faintly. He didn't think you'd ruin it. He knew you'd rebuild it, differently this time. The wind outside howled softly against the windows, like the sea whispering forgiveness. For the first time in a long while there was peace, not comfort but peace between us. 3 weeks later, we were sitting in the glass-walled conference room of Ropes and Gray, high above Boston Harbor. The sky was a muted silver, the kind that looked both endless and heavy. Evelyn O'Connell, sharp as ever in her gray suit, was flipping through a stack of papers. Claire sat beside me, her back straight but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The tension in her body was palpable, a mixture of shame, hope, and fear. Evelyn cleared her throat. Claire, before we begin, there are some developments you need to be aware of. She slid a few documents across the table. Derek Walsh has been detained in Dublin. Multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Your name was cleared. You're no longer legally responsible for any of his debts. Claire blinked rapidly, trying to process it. So, I'm free. Evelyn nodded. You are. The air between us thickened. Claire exhaled shakily, but before she could speak, Evelyn added, however, there's another matter. The entity that issued your eviction notice, Sullivan Legacy LLC, is under full ownership of your mother, Margaret Sullivan. The room fell silent. Claire turned to me slowly, disbelief painted across her face. You, she whispered. I didn't respond at first. I simply met her gaze, calm, unwavering. Evelyn leaned back, her lips curving slightly, as if she knew what was coming next. Claire's voice cracked, the realization hitting her like a tidal wave. Mom, you let me scrub floors in a law firm, this firm, while you owned half the city? Her voice rose, trembling with confusion more than anger. You let me clean toilets while you could buy the whole building? I leaned forward slightly, my tone gentle but sharp as glass. Because you needed to learn the value of $14 an hour, not $14 million in inheritance. She froze. The words hung in the air like a truth too heavy to touch. Evelyn looked away respectfully, pretending to read her notes, while Claire's tears returned, this time not from sorrow but understanding. She covered her mouth, nodding slowly, as if her heart was catching up to what her mind finally grasped. I reached for her hand. It trembled, but she didn't pull away. Tom built everything for love, not legacy, I said softly. And I kept it hidden because I refused to let money raise you. Now that you've fallen, you can finally understand what he meant. Claire looked out the window toward the harbor. her reflection framed by the skyline her father helped build. Her voice broke into a fragile whisper. "I don't deserve this." "No one ever does," I said. "That's why it's called grace." For a long while none of us spoke. Only the sound of the wind brushing against the glass and the soft hum of the city below filled the silence. Then, as if releasing a breath she'd held her entire life, Claire finally turned back to me. Her face red, her eyes raw, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom, for not saving me." I smiled through my own tears. "I didn't save you, Claire. You saved yourself. I just held the mirror." Outside, the winter light broke through the clouds, glinting off the harbor like liquid silver. The camera of life, if there had been one, would have caught that moment. Mother and daughter, divided for years by pride and illusion, finally sitting together in fragile, luminous peace. No grand speeches. No hugs. Just the quiet recognition that love had done its hardest work, not by giving but by teaching how to earn. 6 months later, the ocean outside Cape Cod sounded softer, almost forgiving. The once private Sullivan Beach House now stood open under a new name, Sullivan Haven. Its white shutters had been repainted by women who once trembled with fear but now laughed in the kitchen as the scent of baked bread filled the hall. What used to be a symbol of loss had become a shelter, a refuge for women starting over. Claire ran the program with quiet grace. She still kept her old uniform from the cleaning service, and every Tuesday and Friday, she showed up at the community center to mop the same marble floors she used to resent. "It keeps me grounded," she would say when people asked why. Maggie never corrected her. She only smiled, proud but silent. That evening they had dinner on the porch, mother and daughter, no tension, just the rhythmic waves and the slow burn of the sunset. The wind brushed through Maggie's silver hair as Claire lifted her glass and whispered, her voice trembling, "Thank you, Mom, for not saving me, but for teaching me how to save myself." Maggie looked out at the water, calm, endless, full of quiet answers. "We're not mother and daughter anymore," she said softly. "We're allies." If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, but for those who've had to rise from their own mistakes. Because sometimes the most painful lessons are life's greatest gifts.